Hello there, AP Human Geography students. Let's learn all about American and Chinese industrial economies. This is a big kind of comparison lesson, and it's all about an FRQ you're going to do in class. So let's check it out right now. All right, American versus Chinese industry. This is what you'll see if you go to states like Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania today. A whole lot of these old factory buildings that are no longer in use. If you go inside them, this is what you'll see. These were very productive parts of our country back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, but today they all sort of look like this. And then, yeah, a lot of American workers need jobs. That's true. We still do have some factories going in the United States. This is a big chemical processing plant. But this is the bigger reality. There's a lot of dead buildings, especially in the Midwestern states. Okay. So let's talk about what life was like in the Midwest in the 1950s. And the big cities in the Midwest United States are Chicago, Detroit, Pittsburgh, to a degree Philadelphia, some cities in northern New York like Albany. But those cities had high qualities of life, and their huge parts of their economies were industrial manufacturing jobs using the Ford assembly line, making cars, making planes, making refrigerators, making microwaves, just everything the United States needed. We made it here in America. And this concept is a Fordism production. It's just sort of these big factories, mass production. And during this time period in the 1950s, the minimum wage in the United States was 75 cents an hour. But back then, $1 could buy you a whole lot. I mean, back in the 1950s, $1 could get you like a steak dinner, and a McDonald's hamburger was like a nickel. So 75 cents an hour, you could definitely do a whole lot with it. But yeah, so check it out. This is life in the Midwest in the 1950s. So this was the factory of the world. I mean, America, we sold cars all over the world. We sold refrigerators, everything we built in America, sold it abroad. And then this is what Chicago looks like. And I have a picture of Chicago today. It definitely doesn't look the same. I like this show that's playing, The Gaylords. Wow, there's a lot going on there. And then here's an assembly line process going on. Here's people working the assembly lines in the Midwest. There's people going to work. All right, now what was China like 70 years ago? Well, here's a bunch of pictures of China. China had virtually no manufacturing. Everybody in China, very, very, very poor. And China's economy was actually going down during the 1950s. I'm not going to get into all the terrible decisions the Chinese government made in the 1950s, but just know things were getting worse. People were being told to leave the cities, to go into the field, to grow rice. A lot of people didn't know how to grow this stuff. Things were getting bad. Minimum wage in China was effectively $0 an hour, and people were sort of functional slaves under Mao's version of communism back then. So things in China, they couldn't build anything. They didn't have any factory infrastructure. They didn't have any other choice than to just be farmers all the dang time. So this is China 70 years ago. Here they are growing stuff, and there's people working in the rice fields. Okay, so this is really the big kind of theme of this lesson. How did this change occur in the last 70 years? How did it go from America making everything to China making everything? And this concept is called the New International Division of Labor. It's the shift of manufacturing jobs from the Western world to the developing world, and especially China. But today, my understanding is that more and more jobs are actually switching from China to even other parts of Asia too. So it's a continually changing process. But the overall theme of the West loses industrial manufacturing, the Asian part of the world gains manufacturing. And here's some statistics to just prove that. So the West plus Japan made 90% of all secondary economic products in 1953. In 1998, they were still making 77%. So things were still looking pretty good in 1998. But in 2018, they're only making 35%. So there was just a huge drop in American manufacturing between 1998 and 2018. So what happened, especially in just those 20 years? But it was a sliding scale downward ever since the 1950s. China, on the other hand, they only made 3% of everything in the world in 1953, and you can see that they're just growing, and especially between 1998 and 2018, they almost doubled their factory production. And I think if I even had statistics today for 2021, it would still be even higher for China and lower for the West and Japan. And this is a trend that's what this whole lesson is about. So how did the factories move over there? Let's see what happened. Okay. So, yep, there still are some things being made in America. We've still got 35% with the West plus Japan. So, but there's a whole lot more kind of like factory robot stuff happening here. It looks a lot more kind of high tech. And this is what you'd see in Japan, this is what you see in China. So people are putting shoes together. There's a whole lot of Chinese workers, but maybe not as many kind of technical assistants going on there. Okay, so what was happening? Well, especially starting in the 1980s, workers in America were demanding higher and higher wages. Okay, I told you back in the 1950s, Americans were making 75 cents an hour. But by the time we get to the 1980s, Americans are going to say, we want $5 an hour, we want $8 an hour. They're just going to keep bumping it up and bumping it up. Also, the United States government was having tighter and tighter environmental controls, saying, hey, if you're a factory, if you make any kind of waste as you produce stuff in your factory, you have to really, really make sure you do everything you can not to pollute the environment. So it puts more pressure on the business owners. But I'm going to argue the biggest thing was the unionized workers, especially in the states of Michigan and Illinois and Ohio. These unionized workers said the only way we will work for your company is if you give us full medical care, if you give us a retirement, if you guarantee all of these things, guarantee so many sick days, so many holidays, and all of this pressure was put on these business owners, especially these manufacturers, and they just said, you know what, we can't afford you American workers anymore. You guys are asking for too much. So as we'll see on the next slide, this is going to be the primary motivation for factory jobs leaving the United States. It's that the American worker just demanded too much, and the bosses said, you know what, we're not going to give you jobs anymore. So moving away. All right, so let's check it out. All right, we're choking. The government's joking. Here's a bunch of kids saying we need more environmental protections, time for clean air, toxic water, and then unions on strike, unfair labor practices, save the children, 18 is long enough, clean up your mess, you factories. And then, here's the federal minimum wage over time. We see back in the 1950s, here it was at 75 cents. And then in 2013, it's above $7 an hour. But there were some states where minimum wage was like $11 an hour. Wow, that's pretty big. And then here's minimum wage around the world. So you can see all of the highest minimum wages in the world, with the exception of Japan and then South Korea. They're all in the Western world. But then again, Japan and South Korea, they're the Far East. And then, Far East. Okay, so Argentina is the Latin American country that's highest on this list. But, so many high minimum wages, especially Australia. This is an interesting side comment. Australia has this huge minimum wage. And Australia does a whole lot to, really try to balance out the amount of money people have in society. You can be kind of a lower level worker in Australia and still have a good amount of money to play around with. I can comment about this more if any kids have more questions. I've met a lot of Australians in my life. Okay, and so here's minimum wage map around the world. So Australia is the highest minimum wage, and then Japan, Germany, France, Canada, and America's pretty high on the list. But what's low on the list? Sub-Saharan Africa, developing Asia. Okay, so big companies, they just had enough. They said, you know what, we can't afford you American workers. You're asking for way too much, so we're out of this. So they closed the factories, especially in the Midwest United States, and they moved over to Asia so they could pay workers 1/20th of the price. Okay, and the 2018 minimum wage in China is $2.90 with no benefits. And that's the bigger thing, because you have to pay an American worker health care coverage, and you have to pay them a retirement bonus, the retirement stuff. You have to give them holidays off. Chinese workers, they don't get any of that. They just get a paycheck. They have no sick days, no holidays, no medical care. So it's way, way cheaper to hire a Chinese person to do the job you'd otherwise have an American do. And that's the reality. So moving things over there to China. All right, so here's some Chinese workers working on an assembly line. Here's some more Chinese workers. This isn't a very safe-looking factory, is it? Oh, goodness. Here they are in more of a proper factory. Here they're building these new buildings in China. What is this? A 200-story energy material efficient for 100,000 people? What? 100,000 people buildings. Man, Chinese cities are growing crazy. Here's this Chinese kind of stuff going on over there. They're building all kinds of stuff in China. Oh my goodness. There's the Foxconn building. Hopefully I already talked about that to you kids. And then skilled labor, big deal. They're a dime a dozen in China, and non-union too. Thank God for NAFTA. So those are the factory owners, and they're just leaving the American workers behind. Yeah. All right, and the other thing too, factories in China, they have no environmental regulations. China just doesn't care what you do with the industrial waste. China is very quickly becoming one of the most polluted places on Earth. I've personally never been to China, but many of my friends have, and all of them have commented that China's just kind of like not clean, especially in regard to the environment. So kind of a dirty, yucky environment. So yep, this is what you'd see in a lot of Chinese cities. Good luck breathing all that in. Here's some people walking around. This is pre-pandemic, kids. This is like 2015. People have face masks on. And then there's people going around the city. You can't even see in front of your face. And there they are just dumping garbage into a river. And I don't think the river is supposed to be red. I think that's all a bunch of industrial waste. That's super gross. Okay. So, today the Midwest is just a shadow of what it once was. We now refer to the Midwestern United States as the Rust Belt, and it's because all of these rusting factories that used to be big job providers and big money makers for the United States, we're just letting them sit there and letting them rot. So that's why we're known now as a post-Fordist economy. We still do have some factories, but those factories are largely staffed by robots with very few human operators. And the minimum wage in Michigan today is still $9.25 an hour, with an additional $6 an hour for benefits and union wages. So you're talking about $14 an hour. Why would you open a factory in Michigan? Like, the workers there are just too expensive. And this is the question that just never really gets addressed. There's all these people that say, we got to pay American workers more. Well, I mean, we still also have to compete with the international economy, and China's just undercutting us every time. So why would anyone build a factory in the United States? It doesn't make logical sense, unless if you can have that factory staffed by robots, and then you never pay robots. So there you go. That's a post-Fordist economy. Okay, let's check out some of the information here. So manufacturing jobs, percent of total jobs in the United States. You can see back in the 1960s, it was a quarter of all jobs in the United States were in the manufacturing sector, secondary sector. But as we get closer and closer to the present, this number continually is going down. And today, less than 10% of jobs in the United States are manufacturing jobs. And it's because you can do the manufacturing cheaper in other countries, and we don't want to pay American workers big money. So, yeah. So what is this? This is the movers study. Where are people moving? Where are people leaving is in yellow, and where are people coming in is in blue. And you see almost all the states in the Midwest, a lot of people are leaving. Some of my best friends here in Las Vegas came from Michigan, came from Wisconsin, came from Ohio, came from Illinois, and all of them have told me that they had family members who used to work in factories and now no longer. So this is kind of a very depressing part of the United States. So many people trying to leave. Ugh. And then, robots are working in some factories. Here's the people helping out a robot. This guy needs a job. Well, maybe if you didn't need $15 an hour, we could have given you a job. And then, what does this used to say? Motor City. And Motor City was the old name for Detroit. And this is what you'll see all over Detroit. A lot of abandoned buildings. Here's the American worker. People are like, hey, you want to buy one of these? And they're like, no. And yep, here's the old Chrysler factory. It's basically turned into rubble. Okay, so this is a word you really should know. Brownfield is what you would see all over the Midwestern United States. It's an abandoned factory that discourages development in the area. You really don't want to build brand new houses right next to an abandoned factory. It just doesn't really look great. And also, like, yeah, all these abandoned factories, it would actually cost a lot of money to, like, properly clean them up. And then there's the fact that all this rust can kind of merge with the water and contaminate other stuff. So by just leaving all these old factory buildings to rot, it's not good for the United States. Not good at all. But, yep, brownfields. I saw a lot of these when I went to Cincinnati, Ohio. Just driving around, it's like, oh, that used to be a steel mill, now it's abandoned. Oh, that used to be a factory, now it's abandoned. It's really sad, honestly. So, closed factories. Here's a factory that's kind of decaying away. And then people doing graffiti all over this old factory. Okay, so I'm actually very prepared to argue this. The frustration of many of these former factory workers is one of the main reasons why Donald Trump won the entirety of the Midwest, well, with the exception of Illinois, but he won most of the Midwestern states during the election in 2016. So a whole lot of people used to vote Democrat, but then, especially under Obama's term of his 8 years, so many of those factories closed, so many of those jobs went to China, that these people were jobless and frustrated, and Donald Trump promised to make America great again, so they gave this man their vote. Okay, let's check it out. So here's, this is Obama's win in 2008 versus Trump's win in 2016. So this is the Obama map, and we can see that virtually the entire Midwestern United States went to Obama. But then, when you compare it to which states did Trump win in 2016, we can actually cut the country in half, and it's the same. Okay, like from here over, it's totally the same. But which states did Trump flip? Well, he flipped Florida. We don't talk about Florida. He flipped Iowa. He flipped North Carolina. But then he flipped so many of these Midwestern states. And these Midwestern states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, they used to always go Democrat because they were very big into unions and very big into protecting their labor, but they were so good at making unions powerful that the bosses just stopped having the factories. And the workers got so upset, they voted for Trump and made him our president in 2016. Interesting. Yeah, and another thing to notice too is each state is given a certain amount of points based on how many people live there. And back in 2008, Michigan was 17 points, Ohio was 20 points, Pennsylvania was 21 points. All of these states lost points 8 years later, and it's because so many people left. So sad. So sad, America. You make me cry. Okay, so yep, that was Obama's map, and there's Trump's map. So, all right, and here's a bunch of people voting for Donald Trump. Crossover, vote for Trump, ground zero in Ohio, make America great again. And then, yeah, just about every region of these 4 states went Donald Trump. It's pretty crazy. There's Trump standing by one of these old factories, promising to improve the country. And then how Americans participated in the election. So many didn't even vote, but the ones who voted for Trump were excited about it. And then Trump performs better with working class people. Yeah, so a lot of these working class people were excited that Trump would bring the jobs back. Okay, and let's talk specifically about the city of Flint, Michigan. Flint, Michigan was still is, a supposedly factory town, but just about all the factories have closed in the state of Michigan. It's a majority African-American city, and the city of Flint, Michigan made some terrible choices because so many people quit the city and all the factories left, so the city wasn't getting any tax revenue. The city said, hey, it's really expensive to operate our water plant, So instead of having our water plant provide water for the people, we're just going to pump water straight in from the river. And the problem with that is pretty obvious, that the rivers around Flint, Michigan had a lot of contamination from some of these factories that have existed there for 100+ years. So people were getting this water piped into their houses that was full of just garbage and chemicals, and it made a lot of people really, really sick. And the thing is, just about all the plumbing in the whole city is now super contaminated. So the only way they could really fix it is if they replace every single piece of plumbing underneath the entire cityscape. And they're generally not going to do that. So this city is functionally now dead. And it's also just really, really sad. Okay, let's check it out. So here's a Flint Vehicle City. How many vehicles are in this frickin' road, kids? You know, you remember those old pictures back in the 1950s? These cities were so crowded with people and so much to do. But now, just about everybody's left. And then, yeah, it's an abandoned town. Flint water, Detroit water. Detroit has super clean water. Flint, not the case. This is what those pipes look like. They're all just getting wrecked. Here's somebody turn on the bathtub and all this brown crap comes out. And then, yeah, poisoning in American City. And it's a water crisis. Still unresolved, by the way. But now let's also talk about what's happening in China. So China is all about becoming an industrial economy, and people are now working. But many of the people working in factories, they have children, and they say, I don't want my children to work in factories. I want my children to get an education so they can eventually, run and manage their own factories. And once these kids go to college and graduate, well, they're going to demand higher wages. So sort of like the same process that happened in the United States, where the workers demanded higher and higher wages and the factories couldn't perform them, so the factories left. That same process is starting to happen in China. Certain people are saying, whoa, these Chinese workers are demanding $5 an hour. I can get workers for $2 an hour in Bangladesh. So the factories are just going to keep kind of bouncing around the world till they get to a place where workers all over the world demand higher and higher wages. Okay, so, yep. And look at these people, white guys going around the world to teach English to Asian kids. Who would ever do that? Shh. But hey, they paid me big money to teach English in South Korea. And I know that this is still going to continue to be the case, that Chinese parents are going to make more and more money, and they're going to have a higher and higher demand for globalized educations. So, yep, here's a bunch of kids reading English. Here they are learning English in China. Yep, this is Chinese high school. Some are serious than American high school. Here's some kids learning stuff. And, yep, oh, yeah, English teaching. I remember these days. And, yep, Harvard, CSA. They always like to put names like Harvard and Princeton on schools to make them sound better than they are. Yep, and then graduate English orator. There you go. All right, and that's it for me. Peace out.